Welcome back, everyone, and I'm really pleased that we've got a fantastic panel to join us now to look at the role of supply chains and procurement in the decarbonisation agenda. So I'm going to introduce them one by one and get them to give a little bit of an overview of who they are and their current roles in the industry. And then we're going to be opening it up for questions fairly quickly thereafter. So first on my list is Oliver Mooney from Fusion 21. So Oliver, over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Oliver from Fusion 21. We are a national social enterprise providing compliant procurement solutions across the public sector, providing efficient and impactful service within the built environment, focused on value for money, sustainability and social impact. Currently work with around 900 member organisations across the wider public sector, education, blue light and predominantly the housing sector. As a category manager, I oversee the delivery of procurement solutions to our clients and members, delivering call-off services focused on capital expenditure works. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a significant pressure on members in our supply chain to make strides towards achieving net zero carbon. At a strategic level, we've seen government policy and guidance in the forms of recent PPMs in 0521, 0621, which have brought in consideration and tangible steps to minimise the environmental impact of work and contracts, and also looking at assessing the requirements of suppliers to commit towards carbon reduction through carbon reduction plans. At a more practical level, we've seen our members have started to undertake works to improve the energy performance of their stock. While in the main this has been driven by funding to date, we've started to see a shift in organisations taking significant steps to delivering long-term programmes of work at scale. However, we understand that the success of these will be dependent on understanding the motivating factors, developing robust contracts, supporting innovation, and looking to share cost and risk while developing supply chain capacity. So we've seen a kind of both sides of things from the last few years, both from policy and both on the ground level in terms of what people are doing and how they're looking to incorporate sort of carbon reduction and net zero targets within their asset management strategies.
Thank you, Oliver. So next up, we've got Sean McCarthy from Action Sustainability. So, Sean.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sean McCarthy. I'm a director of Action Sustainability. This is a business that I started in 2006. We do four things. We're consultants in sustainable supply chain management, and we have other sustainability issues that we consult in, like carbon and social value, modern slavery, etc. We run the Supply Chain Sustainability School in the built environment sector, and I chair the board of the Supply Chain School. The school is 10 years old next week. We have our 10th anniversary event next Tuesday, and I'm also delighted to say that in the Jubilee year, we've won a Queen's Award for Enterprise in Sustainable Development. We have over 180 partners now, all contributing to the school, and tens of thousands of organisations that have taken part in one way or another in the education. We have a piece of cloud-based software that we use to help some clients to measure and manage their sustainability performance through their supply chains. And we also have a not-for-profit arm to our business, Action Sustainability Community Interest Company. This business, the mission of this business is to build the body of knowledge of sustainable procurement around the world based on the standard ISO 2400. And we access all parts of the world there. We share a lot of information through a global community of practice. I guess, like most of the speakers today, we've seen a massive hike in interest in both social and environmental sustainability impacts over the last 18 months or so, maybe even less than that. And things like the Supply Chain School are starting to become really very much a kind of go-to resource for the industry as the agenda continually ramps up and up. I think there's also something about leadership as well, and setting new standards, where the school is very much a collaboration. It's about organisations working together, and I think we need to do more and more of that as we go forward.
There's a collaboration, okay then. So in terms of next person on our panel, Dan Billing from one of our sponsors, BAM Construct. So Dan, we got to meet the other day, so welcome.
Cheers, Dan. So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dan Billings. I'm Head of Procurement for BAM Construct. BAM Construct, as many of you are probably aware, is a Tier 1 main contractor that are part of the Royal BAM Group, and within the built environment that BAM Construct operate a wide range of projects from education, healthcare, offices, arenas, multiple projects varying in size and stature. And my role within BAM is to manage the supply chain throughout the UK and the teams that look to engage and manage those relationships so the project teams are supported. And I think the supply chain have a fundamental role in this. And for me, it's understanding that supply chain and the different levels of knowledge, experience. There'll be the fear of change. As interesting listening to Sam earlier, and that fear of change and what we need to do and how we as a main contractor need to sort of upskill those that might have a bit of a fear of change, but also understand those that relish it and embrace it, and work closely with those that want to move forward and want to support the agenda that I think we shouldn't be scared of. There is once again, one of the big things we're looking into now is the actual construction methods and working towards the modern methods and understanding that actually we can't achieve what is required by just tweaking things. It does need to be some major changes.
Thanks, Dan, for that. That's appreciated. I think business as usual is very much dead, I think, in terms of if we want to meet the scale of the ambition and challenge that we need to. And our final panelist is Prab Banger from Aecon in Canada. So really pleased that you're joining us.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning to the fellow Canadian audience members, and good afternoon to the UK and European members. My name is Prab Banga. I'm Director of Sustainability with Aecon Construction. For those of you who aren't familiar with Aecon Construction, they're a Canadian leader in construction and infrastructure development. We deliver integrated solutions to private and public sector clients through our construction segment in civil, urban transportation, nuclear, utility, and industrial sectors. And we also provide project development, financing, and investment and management services through our concession segment. At Aecon, our purpose is to build what matters to enable future generations to thrive. This purpose not only positions us to build what matters, but also how we build it by focusing on integrating sustainability into our construction practices. In 2021, Aecon set an emissions reduction goal to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050. A key component of achieving those emissions reductions are working with our supply chain, not only working with them on introducing new technologies into our operations, also encouraging our supply chain to measure their own emissions and report on their own emissions. We also just recently became the first construction company in North America to conduct a comprehensive Scope 3 emissions scan, which involved working with our suppliers to understand their emissions, specifically from building materials. So I'll talk more about sort of how we're collaborating with our supply chain, especially on piloting new technologies, helping our supply chain reduce their emissions, and working collaboratively to get to our net zero goals.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. I think we've got a really good range of experience across the panel today. I'm going to open up the sort of questions from me first on a couple of things that I wanted to cover before we open up to the wider audience questions. And first thing is, for your given sector or your given organisation, where do you see the sort of biggest opportunity in the next 2-year horizon for driving down further the carbon impacts and the environmental impacts from your particular sector? So through the work you're doing in procurement and supply chain. So that's I might go to Dan first if you
Cheers, Dan. So yeah, from short-term opportunities, obviously we've got a large team of sustainability advisors, managers, heads of I work very closely with in the procurement and supply chain team. Obviously, if we're talking 2 years, a lot of the projects we'll be working on in the next 2 years we're already well underway. Concept designs already sort of rubber stamped, and we're perhaps not able to get to those modern methods within that short-term period. So I think it's fundamental that we're working with our partners. We're looking at the way they operate. We're understanding what we can do to support them if needed, and again how we can look to help them achieve some of our pretty robust targets and try and align our businesses with all of our supply chain. And it's interesting because you start to work through the designs, and we can start looking at more efficient products, whether that's from the concrete and steel, and working with design teams. I was actually in one of our regional offices, and we'd appointed a consultant who was doing a full analysis on the different potentials of the frame and the efficiencies available to each. And obviously the spanner in the works at the minute is the inflation prices that are significantly impacting the commercial side of the business. So it's there's a lot of challenges out there that will some can work against each other at times. They really can, but I think it's safe to say that obviously I'm representing BAM, so a lot of main contractors will be saying the same. That sustainability agenda is key, and the BAM strategy is building a sustainable tomorrow. If you can see the importance
it does seem to be rising in people's corporate strategies, and obviously at the boardroom, not in particular for anyone who's got listed companies with the new climate disclosures. It starts to become a real driver for many in the industry, whether they own the assets or whether they are delivering the building of them. It is rising up the agenda. Who else would like to jump in on that first question?
I can jump in. I think
one of the biggest.
I think one of the biggest opportunities definitely lies sort of at the start of the process when awarding contracts to suppliers, and attaching a higher valuation when you're looking at how you assess your suppliers, and attaching a higher value to sustainability and innovation. I think that's one of the most creative ways to encourage and engage your suppliers to be innovative, to bring forth alternative products and services with reduced emissions, but also encourage them to work on new technologies and bring forth new technologies that reduce emissions. In Canada, we see that valuation right now at about 1% to 2% is worth environmental and sustainability related criteria. I know in Europe it's much higher, but I think that there's an opportunity to increase that significantly to really encourage suppliers to be innovative and focus on sustainability. And the second one related is asking your suppliers to report on their environmental metrics, specifically their emissions. We at AECON included in our screening process, so all our suppliers are asked to fill out an ESG survey, but even eventually we'd like to take that a step further and work with our suppliers to understand how they're reducing their emissions in their own operations, because ultimately that is our scope 3 emissions. So, and within the construction industry, scope 3 is as we know, the highest source of emissions, and we can't get to those net zero goals without encouraging our supply chain to also be focusing on reducing their own emissions.
I was saying at the end of the earlier session, what gets measured gets done normally, and also if what gets counted for award of contracts also focuses the mind in terms of making it a priority for people. So yeah, some great points there. You also mentioned the role of that technology can play. So did you want to expand a bit further on that in terms of where you see the opportunities for technology to make a difference through new procurement processes?
Yeah, so we've actually been working closely with our suppliers to encourage them to bring forth new technologies that might not even be on the market. And we've put our hand up to offer our suppliers to trial some of those new technologies across our site. So a recent example is we partnered with Volvo on trialing their electric excavator and their electric wheel loader. Both of these weren't available on the market yet, but we got the opportunity to trial them across our operations, and we were able to provide real-time feedback back to Volvo in terms of how our experience was. We also recently partnered with a startup company that has come up with a methodology to reduce the amount of emissions associated with concrete production. Again, like they're just entering the market, but we provided them with a platform to trial their technology. So I think that those types of partnerships are really important, and encouraging your supply chain to bring forth those technologies that might not be available on the market yet, but providing them that platform to be able to trial those technologies. Obviously, there's benefits both ways, because as an organization, you get to see how these new technologies can be integrated into your operations, but then your suppliers benefit from it because you're providing them with real-time feedback about your experience and how to improve some of those technologies.
Oh, wonderful. I think that sort of enabling and sharing that risk and also the opportunity for moving forward is a great one there. I might turn to Oliver. You've got some experience in terms of engaging public sector, and I think it's something that we've been working with at the Active Building Centre as well, where we're starting to see some local governments in particular starting to use their procurement power to drive more net zero development, or indeed lower carbon construction. What are you seeing, Oliver, in terms of the opportunities there for public sector and government generally to take a lead in this space?
So I think obviously some of the kind of more recent guidance and the national procurement policy gives a kind of top line overview of stuff. Sometimes it doesn't dive into specifics and detail of exactly how to achieve some of those things. So I think some of the organisations that are more towards the forefront of things have been able to define what they're trying to achieve as an organisation themselves, what their own values are, and then communicate that through the procurement process, either through early engagement with supply chain or just that kind of more negotiated one-on-one approach with people, and have then actually put contracts in place that allow for new solutions, allow for innovation, allow for better collaboration. I think the challenge over the next couple of years, and it may seem quite small, is for people to actually start that journey across the whole public sector, defining what their values are as an organization. What does net zero mean to them? Why are they doing it? What are they actually trying to achieve? Some of the wider benefits within the housing sector. It's an opportunity for them to actually break down other issues they've got around sort of inclusion, financial issues with their residents, with kind of the cost of energy, with the building's performance. They can actually wrap quite a lot of stuff up into one program of work. They kind of need to get to a point of defining that, work out how to communicate and engage through procurement, I think is the challenge in the next couple of years. And as you say, those that are already working towards it and have taken those steps are kind of partnering with people, working proactively and in an open and collaborative manner at the moment to embrace new technology, new methods of construction, and trialing and piloting stuff. But I think the next couple of years will be sort of really important to get to a place where that's more widespread and more common across the whole of the public sector.
Yeah, I know a couple of local government leaders are starting to flag up what's coming so that they can start to align their supply chains in their region to be able to deliver this agenda. And so I think there's a little bit more forward planning and thinking going in to try and overcome the barriers is what we're starting to see. So that's quite encouraging. Sean, I might turn to you in the next piece. Obviously, there's some barriers to delivery of net zero at times, and we see it in the sort of renewable technology space around. Obviously, we've got 90,000 people trained to work on gas boilers in this country, and perhaps only a few thousand on heat pumps at the minute. And going forward, we're going to need people who can work across solar and plumbing and refrigeration and electricals going forward. Where do you see the kind of skills challenges that link to procurement and supply chains in the fields that you've been working on, particularly from that education perspective?
Yeah, I guess if we think about net zero, there's something about skills and there's something about data. The built environment sector is a very small number of very large players at the top and a very, very large number of very small businesses that make up the sector, and multi-tiered supply chains. So many of our tier one partners really don't necessarily even understand their supply chains beyond that second tier. And reaching out to those is very, very challenging. One of the things that we've tried to do in the supply chain school is to roll out a free carbon calculator. Something really simple. It's online. You can log in. It doesn't cost you anything, and you can start to work out your carbon. And then it does some clever things. It enables partners in the school to a small business can allocate their carbon financially to their clients, and then their clients can start to understand part of their scope 3 footprint. Sounds really, really simple. It's not a complicated tool. You can log in, you tell it your electric, your gas consumption, your vehicle miles, and those sorts of things. And it's become really, really popular. We've got over 1,000 businesses signed up. We've got over 400 businesses already gathering their data. But in small business world, I'd have to say I was quite shocked at the lack of knowledge, where things like utilities and fuel are simply seen as an overhead by a small business and not as something that they can necessarily a cost that they can control. And we're getting phone calls about, the system wants to know about my electricity consumption. Where do I find that information? Look at your bill. But and it sounds so obvious,
but they're not
and I
kind of,
don't mean to be patronising, but the director of a small business, an ops director, or
so
an
many
MD or
people are
something like
not
that,
counting their own. They're not counting their own impacts currently. Yeah.
No, they're not,
Yeah.
and they're
Yeah.
thinking about the obviously the carbon implications, but also the cost implications. So, what we are starting to see now is businesses responding to that. And as was mentioned earlier, if we can start to get businesses really starting to understand their carbon footprint, then they can reduce it and then they can save some money. And in the earlier conversation, Sam was talking about economic solutions and investment and, needing to be able to square that financial circle. Of course you can. We've got an example from Wilmot Dixon where they were working with some of their suppliers on reducing their carbon. And with one quite small business, saved, I think it was £83,000 in a single year. And the business turned over less than 5 million. So that's 83,000 straight to your bottom line. Yeah, it makes a big difference. But it's about helping businesses to have that knowledge, particularly the smaller businesses, and helping them to have access to the data and to provide simple ways of actually recording the data. I think at the other end of the scale, we're starting to get our heads around, the embodied carbon in a ton of concrete or a ton of steel or whatever it might be. That those kind of technical solutions are coming. The answers to low carbon cement, for instance, are not there yet, and that starts to get very complex. But if we think about the built environment sector as a very large number of small businesses, reaching out to them is going to be absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think making it easier for them is an important point there. I know in the last field I worked in landscape, there was much better product disclosures on landscape elements in the US and North America than there were across here in the UK, for instance. So things like product information can also help enormously for people to have already counted the costs on arrival. But I'm going to move next to some of the audience questions because it's really important. We've got a good team of people out there. So I'm going to ask a question, sort of picking up on Prob's point and around use of electric vehicles in construction. Paul maybe is asked, well, it's great hearing around carbon in supply chains, but why has there not been a significant uptake of electric fueled construction machines here in the UK? I don't know if any of our UK-based panelists want to jump in on that. Dan, if you've got a view on that.
Cheers, Dan, and cheers, Paul. It's a good question, and probably the blunt answer might be cost. Initially, there's obviously the capital cost of the machines in operation, the lifespan, and to just sell existing capital assets and buy new is probably not in a business plan of the supply chain. One thing we are doing, again, it's small steps. I know the use of HVO is obviously being driven, which I say it's not where ideally we'd probably want to be at the electric fueled construction machines, but I suppose it's trying to move away from the sort of fuel sources that historically and traditionally have been used. But
I know in our work, Dan, we've been, as we've worked with active building projects with different people, we've been sort of encouraging electric vehicle charging to be included in the design of new builds in particular, and retrofits as well for that matter, to be ready for the electrification shift that needs to happen in terms of vehicles and linking it to parking spaces, and also making sure those are co-located near the buildings to minimise the infrastructure costs as well.
Absolutely, and it's something a lot of our building sites now will have EV charging points for fleet for sort of the operatives on sites. There's that from for your personal vehicle usage. So I've not seen enough on the actual construction machines though, but the infrastructure is certainly growing. We're starting to see more and more capabilities for sites to be able to bring these construction machines with electrical fuel sources. So it's one to sort of continue to push, and hopefully there will be some uptake. And I suppose then it'll be the sort of domino effect. Once someone sees someone using them, and then there won't be enough. It's keeping up with the supply to meet the demand then.
So I've got another question. Dylan Armour asks, given the strained state of supply chains, the dependency on petrochemical products, what questions or approaches can be offered to encourage manufacturers to reduce their emissions, and are there any free toolkits for the market that customers can use or offer up? So obviously Sean mentioned one of those before, but does anyone else have anything around toolkits or sort of the approaches that can be used to help those who manufacture to, help them reduce their emissions as they feed into the construction sector? Is there some examples of how you've put pressure on your supply chain to change and had a good outcome? It'd be good to hear a few of those. Now, Oliver or Prague?
I think one of the ways is definitely starting off with an ESG survey for your suppliers. So a way to screen them, and you can ask very simple questions like, do you collect information about your emissions? Do you have an emissions reduction target? And just by starting off by asking those types of questions already indicates to your supply chain that this is something that's important to you. Your own organization is focusing on it, so you have that expectation of your suppliers as well. So I think the first step is simply to start off with sort of that ESG screening survey that asks questions about their emissions. And then the second is about getting to the products and services that your suppliers offer, and then asking questions about, what are you doing to reduce the amount of emissions associated with the products that you offer? Do you offer alternative green products? And then getting to that point of like, can we be a partner in trialing some of these alternative products and services that you're offering, and work kind of collaboratively and really demonstrate to your suppliers that you are there as a partner to support them in their own emissions reduction journey as well. So really seeing it as a collaborative journey where two organizations are coming together to work towards their emissions reduction goals.
Yeah, and Prab, what's your experience been? We've got another question from Sarah Jolliffe, one of the audience members, is, what's your view on sort of net zero carbon products, and are they credible? Can we count them, or is it just greenwashing? What kind of things have you had to do to assure the kind of claims of supply chains to make sure that you're getting what they're saying they're giving you in terms of carbon emissions impacts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a lot of external verification agencies now that provide that sort of stamp of external verification to ensure that a product is green. I mean, one of the things that's becoming more and more popular, and we're hearing more kind of rumblings about it, are EPDs, environmental product declarations. So those are very similar to what you see like nutritional labels on the back of food. It's sort of like the life cycle approach, and it'll give you environmental criteria about a product or service. In North America, for example, that is a part of Joe Biden's infrastructure plan to encourage suppliers to reduce their emissions by providing information about, by providing EPDs for their products and services. So that's one way. And then I would say look for external verification. So companies that have ISO 14001 registration, Energy Star is another good one. So any sort of external verification really helps to ensure that a product is meeting certain environmental criteria.
No, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, North America does, the product declarations very well, and we need to see more of that here across the pond. So I think Phil Arrowsmith asked a question, and maybe I'll throw this one to Oliver, is, what's your perspective in terms of the best requirements that clients can do or can make to drive the carbon changes in the construction industry? Do you have some examples of where clients have made a major impact?
I think it goes back to some of the clarity on actually what they're trying to achieve and communicating that through the process. So I think people who have looked at more open book mechanisms and more open approaches to actually doing work and working with suppliers. I think some of the, even back on the previous question around the credibility of products, it looks at actually using pilot schemes, doing small scale, actually testing out the outcomes of sort of maybe whole house systems and seeing actually how do they operate and how we can then scale that up. So I think with a new and emerging technology, sometimes there might be a cynical view that it isn't really what it stacks up to be. And actually, I think we have to give the market a chance to develop, to have a range of products. And I think we need to sort of test them, see that they do work, and then look to roll them out. I think from a client's perspective, it is that ability to work with people. If you try and force people's hand especially from a public sector basis, you either end up with something you don't want, you waste money, you don't achieve value out of the end service, or you just kind of completely fail. And if you use the stick to beat people, you just pay more money and put risk that you don't need to take. So I actually do think that being slower, looking at sort of total life costing of stuff, and actually thinking at a larger scale and of the later impacts of stuff, that ability to think slightly bigger and be more prepared to be involved in dialogue will help the industry sort of move towards reducing carbon, driving carbon down. If we just go and tell people what our expectation is, it's just a cost. We see that quite often when people are too specific and aren't engaged in allowing solutions from contractors who know the work to a much greater detail and in a much higher level. If you go in and mandate stuff, you pay for it. So I think be open to people or engage with the supply chain earlier to understand what's possible, what's capable.
Yeah, something definitely that we're wanting to do more of once we start putting a range of different technologies into buildings that perhaps haven't previously been delivered together. We're wanting to kind of enable and encourage the different suppliers in the future to integrate their services more in this sort of active building space. And it's something I'd concur with you is the earlier involvement and sort of helping people understand the different roles that they play and bringing it together earlier, rather than forcing the hand later, is definitely more carrot and less stick, I think, is what we need, don't we? And sort of in that vein, I think while you've got the opportunity and the floor with, we've got an audience obviously online who've asked some great questions. What would be your sort of ask of other players in the sector that you work with to kind of help you achieve this more quickly? If you had an ask of the construction sector, what would it be? I might throw to you first, Sean, in terms of, while we've got an active audience and all, how can they help you drive this agenda forward?
By taking a consistent approach. And it's, if I could use a couple of examples, we've recently done a piece of work looking at big infrastructure clients, where we looked at 20 very large infrastructure clients, and they've all got net zero policies. They're all lovely and bright and shiny and 60 odd pages in some cases. They're all different. They all look at a different scope in terms of what they consider and what they don't consider to be their carbon emissions. There's a different ask of their supply chains. Some are asking for science-based targets, some aren't. Some are looking at carbon disclosure projects, etc., etc. What we've tried to do in the supply chain school is to boil all that down to a simple report, and there's like a one-pager in the middle that describes all of these organizations and what they're asking for. So at least smaller businesses in the sector can actually start to understand. But my ask of the business is, like, get together, guys, and do it once. We still seem to have this habit in the sector of asking for slightly different things, and then wondering why our supply chains get confused, and then wondering why the price goes up. So my ask of the industry was, please be consistent, come together, work together,
and some
collaborate.
Consistency is your plea. Yeah, good one.
Absolutely.
Good one. Yeah.
I'll shut up now. I'm getting into a rant now, so I'm going to shut up.
Oh, that's good. It's good. While you've got the floor, it's important you can. And Dan, what about your ask?
I suppose a similar sort of vein, really, from Sean, and that's that consistency of a lot of the perceived challenges that we are constantly faced with, are sort of the cost side of it, the contractual arrangements, and how we enter into contracts with our clients. And you know, we generally have individual contracts for individual schemes that have a bit of a bespoke design, which can really sort of hinder the process that we're making. And often than not, we might get that contract the day before we need to finalise design, the day before we need to start on site. So again, that time management, that programme, really considering having realistic timelines to be able to take everything into account.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And time matters. So Prab, over to you. What would be your big ask of industry?
Mine would be to be innovative, and I know that's sort of a broad statement, but be innovative in your approach to how you develop your products and services, and don't be afraid to go to your contractors, your clients, with some solutions that you're working on, even if they're in the early stages, because again, like I said before, it's a joint effort, and by bringing new technologies, new efforts, and new innovations forward, we can work together in trialing these and operationalizing them in the construction environment.
Thank you for that. And finally, Oliver, your big ask.
I think it would be some clearer guidance from a central perspective as to actually what are we trying to achieve beyond reducing greenhouse emissions by 2050, and then across the whole sector. I think that consistency of what we are achieving, how we define that, and how we communicate it, so everyone's actually working to the same standard, to the same objectives, and we'll reach the goal together, not independently or against each other.
Yeah, that's interesting, that sort of theme from all of you around the consistency of approach that's needed. It clearly is an area that, I think perhaps there's a tendency, isn't there, to everyone doing things bespoke and not joined up. So that's a good takeaway for everyone. Well, we're sort of coming to the end of our time together, I'm afraid. The time moves very quickly in these panel sessions. So I want to send a massive thank you to Prab, Dan, Sean, and Oliver for your time and your contributions to the panel session today. We'll be having a short break after this session for 10 minutes, and we'll be back online at around 2:55 p.m. UK time. So a massive thank you. And again, thanks to our sponsors, BAM Construct and Aggregate Industries, and we'll be back with you shortly. Thank you to the great panel. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.